The river never lies. At 2:47 a.m., when most souls are lost in dreams, Leela Chin stood at the edge of the Ganges, clutching a photograph that should have been buried 20 years ago. The ancient temple bells chimed their midnight prayers. Candles flickered against the humid Indian air, and the scent of sandalwood incense mixed with something else, something that shouldn't exist. Her dead daughter's perfume. Welcome to Whispers of Dharma, where stories of karma, compassion, and rebirth are softly told to heal the soul. The photograph trembled in Leela's weathered hands. Mira, 7 years old, laughing on a swing in Golden Gate Park just 3 days before the accident that shattered 2 lives forever. But here's what the doctors never told her, what the grief counselors couldn't explain, what 20 years of guilt had hidden from her broken heart. Children who die young often return quickly, and sometimes they come back to forgive the unforgivable. Leela had traveled 8,000 miles to this sacred river, carrying a secret so dark it had poisoned every relationship, every prayer, every attempt at healing for 2 decades. The kind of secret that transforms a mother's love into a prison of shame. She had come here to end her suffering the only way she knew how. But the river had other plans. As she stepped deeper into the holy waters, something impossible happened. A child's voice, clear as temple bells, whispered from behind her, "Mama, I've been waiting for you to come home." When Leela turned around, her heart stopped. Standing on the riverbank was a 7-year-old Indian girl with Mira's eyes, Mira's smile, and a red string bracelet identical to the one Leela had buried with her daughter's body in San Francisco 20 years ago. How do you explain the impossible? How do you process a miracle that arrives at your darkest moment? And why do some souls choose to return through the river of tears we create with our unhealed guilt? Varanasi, the eternal city where death and birth dance together in an endless spiral of souls seeking liberation. The ghats descend like ancient steps into the sacred Ganges, each stone worn smooth by millions of pilgrims who have come here to wash away their karma, to heal their deepest wounds, to find what cannot be found anywhere else on earth. Forgiveness from beyond the veil. Leela Chin had arrived here 3 days ago, a broken woman carrying 20 years of unbearable guilt in her travel-worn suitcase. At 52, she looked much older, her black hair streaked with premature silver, her once bright eyes dimmed by 2 decades of self-imposed penance. She had been a pediatric nurse in San Francisco, dedicating her life to healing children, perhaps hoping that saving others might somehow balance the cosmic scales for the child she failed to save. Her modest guest house room overlooked the Saswamad Ghat, where every evening thousands of pilgrims gathered for the Ganga Aarti ceremony. The ritual flames danced across the water like spirits celebrating their return home, while priests chanted ancient mantras that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the earth. From her small window, Leela watched families arrive daily, some carrying the ashes of loved ones,
others bringing their living children to receive blessings from the holy river. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here, surrounded by families seeking blessings for their children, she had come to end the torment of losing hers. The narrow lanes of the old city pulsed with life, ancient and eternal. Cows wandered freely between small temples, their bells creating a natural symphony with the calls of vendors selling marigolds, incense, and clay lamps. The air was thick with the smoke of cremation fires, the fragrance of jasmine garlands, and the complex spices of street food that reminded Leela painfully of the Indian restaurant where she and Mira had shared their last meal together. Every morning before dawn, she would walk to the Manikarnika Ghat, the burning ground where Hindus believe souls achieve instant liberation. She would sit among the mourning families, watching bodies transform into smoke and ash, wondering if this was how healing was supposed to feel. Like dying a little bit every day until nothing remained of your pain. But healing, she was about to learn, sometimes requires rebirth rather than death. On her third night, unable to sleep through another chorus of temple bells and her own racing thoughts, Leela had finally decided. She had written letters to the few people who still cared about her, arranged for her modest savings to go to a children's hospital in Mira's name, and chosen the spot where she would enter the river for the last time. The Ganges, Hindus believe, washes away all sins. She was about to test that belief with the heaviest sin of all. The sin of a mother who had failed to protect her child. As midnight approached, Leela made her way through the deserted ghats, stepping carefully on stones made slippery by evening prayers and river mist. The usual crowds of pilgrims had dispersed, leaving only a few dedicated priests maintaining eternal flames and the occasional sadhu lost in meditation. She carried only two things: the photograph of Mira laughing on that swing and a small clay oil lamp she had bought earlier that day. She intended to float both on the river before following them into the depths. But as she reached the water's edge, something stopped her. Not fear. She had moved beyond fear long ago. Not second thoughts. She had been planning this moment for months. What stopped her was a sound that shouldn't have been possible in this sacred place at this sacred hour.
The sound of a child giggling. Leela turned, scanning the empty ghat, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the soft splash of small feet entering the water somewhere behind her. When she spun around, her knees nearly buckled. There, wading into the Ganges just 20 feet away, was a little girl who looked exactly like Mira had at 7 years old. To understand the impossible miracle unfolding at the river's edge, we must travel back 20 years to a sunny Saturday in Golden Gate Park, where a young mother's moment of distraction would shatter 2 lives forever. Leela had been 32 then, a dedicated pediatric nurse at UCSF Children's Hospital, recently divorced, but rebuilding her life around the bright, precocious daughter who had become her whole world. Mira was 7, brilliant beyond her years, with dark eyes that sparkled with curiosity and a laugh that could light up the darkest corners of any room.
That Saturday had started perfectly. Mother and daughter at their favorite playground, Mira's red string bracelet, a gift from her grandmother, catching the sunlight as she pumped her legs on the swing, determined to touch the clouds with her toes. "Higher, Mama! I want to fly like the birds," she had called out. And Leela had laughed, pushing harder, watching her daughter soar with pure joy. The phone call came at 2:17 p.m. Dr. Morrison from the hospital, apologizing for calling on her day off, but desperately needing her expertise with a critical case, a 5-year-old boy who had been in a car accident and was asking specifically for Nurse Chen. Children often formed attachments to their caregivers, and sometimes that connection meant the difference between fighting for life and giving up. "I'll just be gone for 2 hours," Leela had promised Mira, whose swing had slowed to a gentle sway. "Mrs. Patterson from next door is coming to watch you. We'll get ice cream when I get back, okay?" But Mira had been developing a stubborn streak lately, testing boundaries as 7-year-olds do. "I don't want Mrs. Patterson. She smells like cats and makes me eat vegetables. I want to come with you to the hospital." "Sweetheart, you know children aren't allowed in the ICU. I promise. Just 2 hours, and then we'll do whatever you want for the rest of the day." The argument had continued for several minutes, with Mira growing more upset and Leela growing more frustrated as precious minutes ticked by. Another child was dying, needed her expertise, and her own child was being unreasonable. Finally, Leela had made the decision that would haunt every remaining moment of her life. She left Mira alone at the playground. "I'll be back in exactly 2 hours," she had said, checking her watch and kissing Mira's forehead, despite the little girl's tears. "Stay right here on this swing. Don't talk to strangers. Don't leave the playground. Promise me?" "I promise, Mama," she had whispered, still crying but trying to be brave. Those were the last words they would ever exchange. At the hospital, Leela threw herself into saving the 5-year-old boy using every skill she had developed over a decade of pediatric nursing. The surgery was complex, requiring her to assist in ways that stretched far beyond her normal duties. But by 4:45 p.m., the boy was stable. She had saved a life and lost another. When she returned to Golden Gate Park at 4:52 p.m., 37 minutes late, the swing was empty. The red string bracelet lay on the ground beneath it, broken. Park security found Mira's body in the pond 20 minutes later. The official investigation concluded that Mira, tired of waiting and possibly trying to catch sight of ducks she had often fed with her mother, had climbed over the safety barrier around the pond. She had slipped on wet rocks, hit her head, and drowned in 3 feet of water. The timeline was precise and unforgiving. Witnesses reported seeing a little girl alone by the pond at approximately 4:30 p.m. If Leela had returned on time, if she had kept her promise, if she had chosen her daughter over another child's emergency, Mira would have lived. The mathematics of guilt are always perfect. The funeral was a blur of flowers, tears, and platitudes about God's mysterious plans. Friends and family tried to comfort Leela, reminding her that she was saving another child's life, that she couldn't have known, that accidents happen to the most careful parents. But guilt doesn't negotiate with logic. Leela knew the truth. She had abandoned her daughter when Mira needed her most. In the 20 years that followed, Leela had tried everything to heal. Therapy, grief counseling, antidepressants, meditation retreats, even a brief stint with a Buddhist monastery in Northern California where she learned about karma and rebirth. The monks taught her that suffering comes from attachment, that healing requires forgiveness, and that some souls return quickly when their previous life ended prematurely. But she had never been able to forgive herself.
Now, standing in the sacred waters of the Ganges at nearly 3 a.m., watching a little girl who looked exactly like her dead daughter wade fearlessly into the river, Leela wondered if 20 years of guilt had finally driven her completely insane, or if the impossible was about to become possible. The child in the river turned toward Leela and time stopped. Not metaphorically stopped, not the way grief counselors describe emotional overwhelm, but literally stopped. The temple bells fell silent mid-chime. The river ceased its eternal flow. Even the flames of the sacred fires froze like golden statues in the humid night air. "Hello, Mama," the little girl said, her voice carrying across the impossible stillness with perfect clarity. She was perhaps 7 years old, with dark hair braided in traditional Indian style, wearing a simple white cotton dress that seemed to glow with its own inner light. But her eyes were unmistakably Mira's. Leela's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the stone steps of the ghat, the photograph of Mira fluttering from her numb fingers to land in the shallow water. "This isn't real," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the supernatural silence. "This isn't possible." The child smiled, and it was Mira's smile, radiant and mischievous and full of love. "You came such a long way to find me, Mama, but I've been here all along, waiting for you to be ready." The girl took a step closer, river water cascading from her small feet without making a sound. "I've been learning about forgiveness. Would you like to learn with me?" 20 years of carefully constructed walls around Leela's heart crumbled in an instant. "Mira, oh God, baby, is it really you? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should never have left you alone. I should have stayed. I should have chosen you. I should have—" "Mama, stop." The command was gentle but absolute. The child, Mira, whatever miracle she represented, waited closer until she stood directly in front of Leela, close enough to touch, but somehow still ethereal, still not quite of this world. "Do you remember his name?" Leela blinked, confusion cutting through her grief. She did remember. The 5-year-old boy from the car accident, the critical case that had pulled her away from the playground. Jason? Yes, but how do you know about Jason? "Because I sent him to you, Mama." The words hit her like a physical blow. The child continued, her voice taking on the wisdom of ages despite her 7-year-old appearance. "In the space between death and rebirth, souls can choose to help other souls. I saw Jason dying, and I saw that you were the only nurse who could save him. So I made sure Dr. Morrison called you that day." "No," she shook her head, unable to process what she was hearing. "No, that's not. You can't have. You died because I left you alone. You died because I chose another child over my own daughter." "I died, Mama, because my time in that body was finished. But I didn't leave you. I've been working through the universe to heal your guilt ever since." The child raised her small hand, and impossibly, Leela felt her daughter's touch on her cheek, warm and real and exactly as she remembered from 20 years of dreams. "Do you know what Jason became when he grew up?" Leela couldn't speak, could only shake her head. "He became a pediatric heart surgeon. Over the past 15 years, he has saved 847 children's lives. Children who grew up to be teachers, doctors, artists, parents. Children who had children of their own, who will have children of their own." The numbers hit Leela like waves, each one carrying impossible implications. "You're saying that because I saved Jason—"
You saved 847 lives, and all the lives they will touch, and all the lives those lives will touch. You created ripples of healing that will flow through time for centuries. Leela felt something shifting inside her chest, some massive weight that had pressed against her heart for 2 decades beginning to lift. "But I failed you. I abandoned you when you needed me most." The child laughed, and the sound was pure joy, pure forgiveness, pure love. "Oh, Mama, you didn't abandon me. You set me free to become something beautiful. I chose to leave that playground. I chose to go to the water. I chose to come back to this river to wait for you." She paused, her young face radiant with ancient compassion. Because some lessons can only be learned through tears, and some forgiveness can only be given by those we think we've lost forever. The impossibility of it all crashed over Leela like a tsunami of hope and terror. Are you telling me that everything, all my guilt, all my suffering, all these years of believing I was the worst mother who ever lived, that it was all part of some cosmic plan? I'm telling you, Mama, that love is stronger than death, forgiveness is stronger than guilt, and karma isn't punishment, it's healing. What followed was the strangest night of Leela's life, as her daughter, or the soul who had been her daughter, or whatever impossible blessing had materialized from the sacred waters, began to show her 20 years of hidden connections she had never seen.
The child took Leela's hand, and suddenly they were no longer standing in the Ganges at 3 a.m. They were in UCSF Children's Hospital, watching a 15-year-old Jason Martinez scrub in for his first surgery as a medical student, his hands steady and sure as he prepared to repair an infant's damaged heart. "This is Timothy Williams," Mira's voice whispered in Leela's ear. "Without Jason's surgery today, Timothy dies. But Timothy is going to grow up to adopt 6 children from foster care." The scene shifted. Now they stood in a classroom in Oakland, watching a 28-year-old woman, one of Jason's early patients, teaching reading to disadvantaged children. Maria Santos. Jason removed a brain tumor from her when she was 9. She'll inspire 3,000 children to graduate high school over her teaching career. Again, the world dissolved and reformed around them. A young father named David Chen, no relation to Leela despite the shared surname, was reading bedtime stories to his twin daughters. Jason saved David's life when he was 12. David's daughters will both become doctors. One will cure a rare childhood cancer in 2043. "Stop," Leela gasped, overwhelmed by the cascade of interconnected lives. "I can't, this is too much. How can you possibly know all this?" They were back at the river now, the child still holding her hand, still glowing with that impossible inner light. Because in death, Mama, we see all the threads that connect every soul to every other soul. We see how one moment of choice creates infinite ripples across time. "But what about you?" Leela's voice broke. "What about your life? What about all the things you never got to do? The woman you never got to become? What about your own ripples?" The child smiled with infinite sadness and infinite joy. "My ripples are these moments with you. My ripples are the healing you'll carry forward. My ripples are the forgiveness you'll finally be able to give yourself." "I don't understand any of this," Leela whispered. "Why didn't you just—"
Move on. Why didn't you reincarnate somewhere else, have a new life, a new family? Why did you wait 20 years for me? Because some souls are so connected that they transcend individual lifetimes. You and I have been together through many incarnations, Mama. Sometimes as mother and daughter, sometimes as teacher and student, sometimes as friends who find each other across impossible distances. But this lifetime, I came specifically to teach you about forgiveness. Not the kind you give to others, you've always been good at that. The kind you give to yourself. Mira, don't go back into the water. Leela instinctively moved toward her daughter, ancient mother panic overriding the supernatural strangeness of their reunion. I'm not going anywhere, Mama. I'm going everywhere. The child's form was becoming translucent now, more light than substance, but her voice remained clear, carrying across the water with the resonance of absolute truth. Live, Mama, live fully, love completely, and forgive yourself the way you would forgive any other mother who made an impossible choice in an impossible moment. How? Leela called out to the fading light. How do I live with this? How do I move forward? How do I honor your memory while letting go of the guilt? The answer came not as words, but as a sudden understanding that flooded Leela's consciousness like warm honey. She would return to nursing, but this time she would specialize in helping families navigate medical crises. She would become a bridge between the clinical world of hospitals and the emotional world of parents facing their worst fears. She would save Jason Martinez 1,000 times over in 1,000 different forms by helping other mothers make impossible choices without destroying themselves in the process. The last points of light faded from the river's surface, leaving Leela alone on the Ghat as the first hints of dawn began to color the eastern sky. But she wasn't really alone. She could feel Mira's presence in the warming air, in the gentle lapping of water against stone, in the temple bells that began their morning prayers. And for the first time in 20 years, Leela Chen felt something she had thought lost forever: peace. As dawn broke over the Ganges, painting the sacred river in shades of gold and rose, Leela discovered she was not alone on the Ghat.
Sitting cross-legged on the stone steps, watching the sunrise with the serene expression of someone who had been waiting patiently for hours, was an elderly Indian woman in simple white clothing. Her silver hair was braided down her back, and her dark eyes held the depth of someone who had seen many lifetimes. "She spoke with you," the woman said without preamble, her English accented but clear. "The little one who has been waiting by this Ghat for many months. I have seen her here before, always at the darkest hour, always watching the water for someone who never came." She turned to look at Leela directly. "Until tonight?" Leela's heart hammered against her ribs. You saw her too? The little girl in the water?" "I am Kamala," the woman replied, neither confirming nor denying what she had witnessed. "I have been a priestess at Kashi Vishwanath Temple for 47 years. I have seen many souls find their way home to the Mother Ganga." She gestured for Leela to sit beside her on the steps. "But I have never seen a soul wait so long for one specific person. Never seen love so strong it could bridge the space between worlds." Her voice grew gentle.
Tell me, daughter, what brought you to our sacred river in the middle of the night, carrying such deep sorrow?" For a moment, Leela couldn't speak. How do you explain the impossible to a stranger? How do you describe a miracle that defies every law of physics and human understanding? But looking into Kamala's ancient, compassionate eyes, she found herself telling the entire story. Everything. The playground, the phone call, the impossible choice, the guilt that had poisoned 20 years of her life. Kamala listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she had heard variations of this story many times before. When Leela finished, the old priestess was quiet for several minutes, watching the river flow past with its eternal burden of prayers, ashes, and hopes. "In our tradition," Kamala said, "we believe that some souls are so bound by love that death cannot separate them. We call them eternal companions, souls who choose to remain connected across lifetimes, helping each other learn the lessons that can only be learned through the deepest love and the deepest forgiveness." But she was just a child, 7 years old. How could a 7-year-old understand cosmic lessons about forgiveness and karma? Kamala smiled, and her entire face transformed with warmth. Age of the body means nothing to the age of the soul, daughter. Some beings come into physical form already carrying the wisdom of many lifetimes. She reached into a small bag beside her and withdrew something that made Leela's breath catch. A red string bracelet, exactly like the one Mira had been wearing the day she died, exactly like the one Leela had found broken beneath the empty swing. "She asked me to give this to you," Kamala said, placing the bracelet gently in Leela's trembling palm. "She said you would understand what it means." Leela's vision blurred with tears. The bracelet was warm in her hand, as if it had been worn by living skin just moments before. "When did she give this to you? How long has she been coming here?" "She appeared the first time 6 months ago, always at the same spot, always asking if I had seen her mother. She told me her mother was carrying a great burden of guilt, and that she had chosen to wait here until her mother was ready to accept forgiveness." 6 months ago? Leela calculated quickly. That was when she had finally made her decision to end her life, when she had started planning this trip to India. "Yes," Kamala nodded, reading her thoughts. "Souls often know when their loved ones are in crisis, even across great distances. Love creates connections that transcend physical space and time." "But how do I know this was real? How do I know I didn't just have a psychotic break from grief and guilt? How do I know you're just a kind stranger trying to help a crazy foreign woman?" Kamala's laughter was like silver bells. "Does it matter, daughter? If your healing came through divine intervention or through the compassionate wisdom of your own heart finally breaking open, does the source of the miracle matter less than the miracle itself?" She stood up, preparing to leave, as the morning prayers grew louder from the nearby temples. "The little one left you with a message," Kamala said, turning back to Leela. "She said to tell you that Jason Martinez is getting married next month in San Francisco. She said you might want to attend the wedding of the man whose life created ripples of healing across thousands of other lives." Leela stared at the priestess, her mouth falling open. There was no way this woman could have known about Jason. No way she could have access to information about a doctor in San Francisco. How could she possibly know that? "Love knows everything that matters," Kamala replied simply, and walked away into the brightening morning, leaving Leela alone with the sunrise, the sacred river, and a red string bracelet that had somehow traveled from death back to life. 3 weeks later, Leela stood in the back of a small chapel in San Francisco, watching Jason Martinez, Now Dr. Jason Martinez, Chief of Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery at UCSF, exchanged vows with a radiant woman named Elena. He was 35 now, tall and confident, with gentle hands that had indeed saved hundreds of lives. As he promised to love and cherish his bride, I could see the boy he had been 20 years ago, dying in a hospital bed, until I had arrived to help save his life.
She had not planned to introduce herself. She had come simply to witness the ripple effects of that impossible choice she had made 2 decades earlier, to see with her own eyes the truth of what Mita had shown her by the river. But as the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception, Jason noticed her standing alone by the chapel door. "Excuse me," he said, approaching with curious kindness. "You look familiar. Have we met?" Leela's heart pounded. How do you tell someone that you saved their life at the cost of your own daughter's? How do you explain that their survival created a cosmic debt you've been trying to balance for 20 years? "I'm Leela Chen," she said simply. "I was one of the nurses who cared for you when you were 5 years old." Jason's face transformed with recognition and joy. "Nurse Chen? Oh my God, I can't believe it! You saved my life. My parents told me about you, how you came in on your day off, how you stayed with me through that entire surgery." He turned to his new wife, who had joined them. "Elena, this is the woman I've told you about. If it wasn't for her, we never would have met. I never would have become a surgeon. None of this would exist." Elena took Leela's hands warmly. "Thank you for saving him. Thank you for giving us this life together." Leela felt tears threatening. "I just did my job. Any nurse would have done the same thing." "No," Jason shook his head. "My parents told me you had your own daughter waiting for you that day. They said you made a choice to put my life first." The words hung in the air between them. Leela looked into Jason's eyes and saw not just gratitude, but understanding. The deep awareness that comes when someone truly comprehends the weight of a sacrifice made on their behalf. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I heard what happened to Mita. I'm so sorry for your loss." For 20 years, Leela had imagined this moment differently. She had pictured anger, resentment, a cosmic accounting where Jason's life could never justify Mita's death. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man whose existence had created exactly the healing ripples Mita had promised. "Tell me about your work," she said quietly. Jason's face lit up. "I specialize in pediatric heart surgery, but I also run a program for families dealing with childhood medical crises. We provide counseling, support, help parents navigate impossible decisions." He paused, studying Leela's face. "Actually, we've been looking for someone with your experience. Someone who understands both the medical side and the parent side of pediatric emergencies. Would you consider joining our team?" Leela felt the world shifting around her, puzzle pieces clicking into place with almost audible precision. This was what Mita had meant about living fully, loving completely, honoring her memory while moving forward. "Yes," she heard herself saying, "yes, I would very much like that." As the reception continued around them, Jason introduced Leela to other doctors, nurses, families whose lives had been touched by his work.
Each introduction felt like another thread in the vast web of connection Mita had shown her by the river. And in her pocket, the red string bracelet from Varanasi seemed to pulse with warmth, as if her daughter was there, witnessing the moment when healing finally began to replace guilt, when love finally proved stronger than loss. 6 months after returning from India, Leela found herself standing in the same playground where she had lost Mita 20 years earlier. But this time, she was not alone in her grief. Beside her stood Maria Santos, a mother whose 8-year-old son was scheduled for heart surgery the following week. Surgery to be performed by Dr. Jason Martinez. Maria had been referred to Leela's new counseling program for families facing pediatric medical crises, and their first session had taken place right here, at the site of Leela's greatest loss and most profound lesson. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong," she whispered, watching her son Diego play on the same swings where Mita had once soared toward the clouds. "Dr. Martinez says he's the best, that I'm so scared. What if I make the wrong decision? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I lose him?" Leela placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. 20 years ago, I stood in this exact spot facing an impossible choice. I had to decide between staying with my daughter and saving another child's life. She paused, watching Diego's joy as he pumped his legs higher and higher. "I made the choice that felt right in that moment, and it cost me everything I thought mattered." "But you saved that other child. Jason told me about you, about how you've dedicated your life to helping families like mine." "Yes," Leela nodded. "But it took me 20 years to understand that some choices transcend right and wrong. Some choices are just necessary, part of a pattern too large for us to see while we're living inside it." Maria turned to look at Leela directly. "Do you think your daughter would forgive you for choosing another child over her?" For the first time since that night at the Ganges, Leela smiled with complete peace. "I know she does. I know she orchestrated the entire thing. And I know that sometimes the deepest love expresses itself through letting go rather than holding on." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Diego play with the carefree abandon that only children possess. The autumn light filtering through the trees created the same golden atmosphere Leela remembered from that last day with Mira. But now the beauty felt healing rather than haunting. "The surgery is going to go perfectly," Leela said with quiet certainty. "Jason has performed this procedure hundreds of times. Diego is going to grow up to do something wonderful with his life. And you're going to discover that you're much stronger than you ever imagined." "How can you be so sure?" Leela touched the red string bracelet around her wrist, the same bracelet the priestess and Varanasi had given her, the same bracelet that had somehow traveled from death back to life. "Because I've learned that love creates patterns across time and space that are bigger than our individual fears. Because I've seen how one moment of choosing to save a life can ripple forward through decades, touching thousands of people we'll never meet. And because some souls love us so much, they'll wait 20 years by a sacred river just to remind us that forgiveness is always possible." Maria looked confused by this last statement, but she seemed to sense its deeper truth. "Will you be there tomorrow, during the surgery?" "I'll be there," Leela promised, "and so will everyone who loves Diego. And so will all the souls who helped create the chain of events that brought Jason the skills to save your son's life. As they prepared to leave the playground, Diego ran over to them, his face flushed with joy from playing. "Mama, can we come back here after my surgery? I want to show you how high I can swing." "Yes, mijo," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll come back here and celebrate." Leela watched them walk away, hand in hand, mother and son facing an uncertain future with courage born of love. And for the first time in 20 years, when she looked at the swing where Mira had played for the last time, she didn't see loss. She saw the beginning of healing that would ripple forward through time, touching lives not yet born, creating connections not yet imagined. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead, and in that sound, Leela heard something that made her smile. It sounded exactly like a little girl's laughter, joyful, eternal, and completely free. 1 year later, Leela received a package with no return address. Inside, she found a photograph that made her heart stop. Diego Santos, now 9 years old and completely recovered from his heart surgery, playing on a swing in Golden Gate Park, the exact same swing where Mira had played 21 years earlier. But that wasn't the miracle that brought tears to her eyes. Standing behind Diego, pushing him higher toward the clouds, was a little girl with dark braided hair wearing a simple white dress. A little girl who looked exactly like Mira. Attached to the photograph was a note in a child's handwriting. "Dear Miss Chen, my name is Priya Martinez. I am Jason and Elena's adopted daughter. Diego told me about his special swing and how it helped him get better. I wanted to play there too. Diego says you're the lady who helps scared mommies and daddies be brave. Thank you for helping my mama and papa understand that love is stronger than fear." Leela's hands trembled as she read the final line. "P.S. I have dreams sometimes about a lady who looks like you. She tells me to remind you that some promises take lifetimes to keep, but they're always worth waiting for." The photograph fell from Leela's nerveless fingers as the truth crashed over her like a wave of pure light. Mira hadn't just waited by the Ganges to deliver forgiveness. She had been working through the universe all along, orchestrating not just Jason's survival, but his marriage to Elena, their decision to adopt, and the arrival of a little girl who would carry forward the love that transcends death itself. Leela picked up her phone with shaking hands and called Jason's office. When he answered, she could barely speak through her tears. "Jason, it's Leela. I need to ask you something about Priya. Where did you adopt her from?" "That's an amazing story, actually, Leela. Elena and I had been trying to have children for years with no success. Then one day, about 6 months after we met you at our wedding, we got a call from an adoption agency. They said a 7-year-old Indian girl had specifically requested to be placed with the doctor who fixes children's hearts so they can love better." Leela closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her like warm honey. What else did she tell the adoption agency? This is the part that gave us chills. She said she had been waiting for us, that she knew in her dreams we were meant to be her family. And Leela, when we met her for the first time, she looked at Elena and said, "Thank you for marrying the doctor. Now I can come home." She knew about Elena before she met her? Apparently, she had been describing Elena perfectly to the social workers for months, right down to the star-shaped birthmark on Elena's left wrist. Leela sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the intricate perfection of it all. Mira hadn't just returned to forgive her, she had orchestrated an entire new incarnation, choosing parents who would understand the sacred nature of healing, positioning herself to continue the work of creating ripples of compassion across time. "Jason," Leela whispered, "I think I need to meet Priya. I think she might have a message for me. Actually, she's been asking about you for months. She keeps saying she wants to meet the lady who taught her papa that saving one life creates infinite possibilities for love." 2 weeks later, Leela sat across from 8-year-old Priya Martinez in a small cafe near the hospital. The child was beautiful, with the same dark eyes and radiant smile that had illuminated Leela's world 21 years earlier. "I know who you are," Priya said without preamble, her voice carrying the same ancient wisdom Leela remembered that night at the Ganges. "Do you?" Leela replied gently. "You're my first mama's mama," Priya said, matter-of-factly eating ice cream. "She told me all about you in my before dreams. She said you needed to learn that love never dies. It just changes clothes." Leela felt her heart expand until it seemed too large for her chest. "What else did she tell you?" "That some souls choose to come back quickly because there's too much love to leave behind, and that the best way to honor someone who's gone is to love someone who's still here." Priya reached across the table and took Leela's hand. "She also said to tell you that she's not gone. She's just bigger now. Big enough to love all the children you help and all the families you heal and all the ripples that keep growing from the choice you made that day. And one more thing," Priya added, her eyes twinkling with mischief that was purely, recognizably Mira. "She said next time, maybe don't wait 20 years to accept a miracle." If you believe that karma always guides us, please subscribe and leave a reflection so we can awaken together. Love, as Leela learned by the sacred waters of the Ganges, is the only force in the universe that grows stronger when shared, deeper when given away, and more eternal when it seems most lost. Sometimes healing comes through holding on. Sometimes it comes through letting go. And sometimes, if we're very blessed, it comes through discovering that there was never anything to forgive because love, true love, orchestrates even our deepest sorrows to create our most profound joy. This is Whispers of Dharma. Every story is a seed of wisdom. See you again in the next whisper.